here we are with our first altitude educational program of 22. And I am really excited to be presenting this to you. My name is Elina Gilbert. And so welcome to our very, very first 2022 educational program. So as I always say, if you've heard the spiel before, feel free to ignore me and just laugh at this picture. Otherwise, just some housekeeping things to keep in mind. On your screen, the bulk of it should be the PowerPoint presentation, so you should have the fish with a drink. At the bottom right-hand corner is the presenter, me, hello. And finally, kind of on the left side, you're going to see some icons. And there is an icon in there for texting or for messaging. And that's where you are going to type in your questions. Okay, I'm going to save all questions for the very end of the presentation to make sure we have time to go through all the materials. And then I will answer as many of them as I can, hopefully all of them. But don't be worried if you type in a question and I'm not answering it, because I am saving everything for the end. You will get 1 CMCA credit for attending this webinar. It will be emailed to you. It's going to be automatically generated, probably within about 24 or so hours. And if you are sitting here and all of a sudden you're having any technical difficulties, please don't put anything on the text, because I can't do anything about it from my end. Instead, please reach out to Sean Sanders, who is our educational coordinator. And there's 2 ways you can reach out to him. One is just call him. His direct office line is 303-991-2076, or you can email him at education@altitude.law. Okay, if you haven't received your certificates within the next 2 days, please reach out to Sean, because sometimes there's glitches, things get lost in cyber world, so we never know. So if you don't see in the next couple of days, please reach back out to us so we can get it over to you. All right, so without further ado, let us start and talk about 2021, although I'm sure a lot of you want to forget it. But we're going to talk about it anyway. We're going to see if there's any useful information that we could take back from it to help us in 22. So I don't know if any of you were in attendance at the January 2021 webinar, which was an overview of 2020 and what we learned from 2020. So I started it off in much the same manner, where I actually asked a whole bunch of people, what did you think of 2021? What did you think of 2020? And I made a list. This isn't all Elina. This is a list based on what people told me of the negatives and then the positives. All right. So let's talk about what people thought was negative in 2021. Well, it sucked. We had that also for 2020. It sucked. I don't think anyone can truly argue with that. Trauma carried over from 2020. People were on edge and had less patience. I think we can all probably agree with that one. People were irrational. So a lot of complaints about how people acted, it seems. Many businesses did not survive. Yeah, we did see more businesses unfortunately closing in 21, but thank God not as many as 20. There are staffing shortages. So for those of you, in management companies, perhaps you're experiencing that now, where it's really, really hard to find people to work. We had the Surfside condo collapse, and that was probably one of the worst things in 2021 was that horrible incident. We have inconsistent mandates, and we have intrusive legislation. All of this happened in 21. And we're actually going to go into some detail on these mandates and the legislation issue. But these are all the things that people listed as being negative. Okay, so you're probably wondering, well, there's nothing left. What's positive? Nobody had anything positive to say, but you're wrong, because they did. So what did people have to say was positive? It could have been worse. I guess that's sort of positive. It could have been worse. People were able to find ways of making the best of a stressful climate. That is true. Better coping skills, perhaps. New businesses are opening in place of the ones that close. So that's definitely a positive. It's an opportunity for new businesses, yes. It was better than 2020, very descriptive. We could start traveling again. Yeah, somewhat, right? How many of you traveled in 21? Whether it's a vacation or for business or whatever, you actually got on a plane, traveled somewhere, wore your mask at the airport. I know I did. Some public events came back. So things like movie theaters, concerts, things like that. We're able to start having weddings again. So some public events did come back. We could start going out, and we got better at running HOAs virtually, which I think I agree with pretty much all of these. And my personal opinion, in case anyone cares, but if you don't care, I'm going to tell it to you anyway. My personal opinion is that I think 21 was better than 20. I did think a lot of things were more open, and even though, COVID was still there, and, people are still scared, and we're still wearing masks sometimes and things like that. But I think ultimately, for me personally, at least, I thought 21 was a lot better because I could actually go somewhere. I could go out of town. I managed to get a vacation in there. So I can't complain personally. Now, so that's what we thought of 2021. But what have we learned? Let's talk about some things that we've learned from last year. And insurance costs are not going down. Okay. Some of you are sitting there going, duh, Elina, we already know that. Well, we saw it specifically with premiums and wind hail deductibles, mostly wind hail deductibles. So for those of you who have been in this business a long time, perhaps you remember 20 years ago or so when the insurance deductibles for wind hail claims were the same as your other deductibles for property damage, $10,000 maybe. And then the insurers figure out that, hey, Colorado sure has a lot of wind and hail damage all the time. And these little deductibles aren't really, we're kind of losing money on these. And of course, insurance is not in the business to just give out money. It wants to make money. And so we started seeing a pattern of the wind hail deductibles going to something like a percentage value of either the entire community or a per building value. So for example, we started seeing 1% and 2% deductibles where it was 1% either of the value of each building if it was a multi-building community, or it was 1% of the value of all the buildings in the community. Clearly, we would prefer it be of each building because that is a smaller deductible, especially if not all of the buildings have been damaged. So here's my very basic math. If there's 10 buildings in the community and each one is worth $100,000, so collectively it's $1 million. If there is a per building deductible of, let's say, 10% of the building value, then each building has a $1,000 deductible, right? And so if you're only replacing the roof on 3 of the 10 buildings, your deductible is going to be around $3,000. On the other hand, if the deductible was 10% of the value of all buildings, we'd be looking at a $10,000 deductible anytime we replace a roof, whether it's one building or all buildings. So clearly, from a financial standpoint, it definitely is better if you can try and get your deductible to be a percentage of the value of each building as opposed to all the buildings in the community. Now, we went to the 1%, 2% building value deductibles. Then we kind of went up a little bit. It was somewhere around 5% for a while. That became the standard. Now I'm seeing it's pretty standard to see 10% to 20%. When you're seeing that much of a deductible, I mean, essentially the associations are starting to self-insure, right? Because it becomes that the deductible is so high that the insurance company ends up paying very little of the total cost. Or it pays a chunk of the total cost, but the chunk that's left over is just so high, it's not something that an association can really budget for. And so associations are kind of stuck figuring out how to pay for these exorbitant deductibles. Now, premiums are also going up, as you know, but not like the wind hail deductibles. And honestly, I anticipate it's going to keep going up unless and until we have the government intervene, whether it's Colorado government or the federal government. If there is not a cap, that the government imposes on folks, then, or on the insurance companies, if there's not, this is the most you can charge or have for a deductible for wind hail losses, I think we're going to keep seeing it increase. And I have not heard of any legislation at this point, at least, where there is a cap on that. So that's one thing we've learned, that insurance costs are not going to go down, and they haven't been going down. Okay? That's kind of a sad one. What else have we learned? Associations are being forced to take maintenance and repair insurance much more seriously. So this is something that is new and very important that I really want to spend a little bit of time on. So this all comes from the Surfside collapse, right? The building collapsed. Obviously, people were hurt, people died. There was severe property damage, lawsuits all over the place. And now everyone's kind of looking at it going, oh my gosh, what happens if our building is next? Or one of our buildings is next? Everyone's freaking out about it. Whether that's logical or not logical, right or wrong, this is what's happening. And so one of kind of the biggest entities that is worried about this are your secondary lending markets, because they feel, if I'm going to give money to this person to purchase a home, to purchase a unit in this community, well, what happens to my money if everything collapses? I might lose everything. I might not get any of it back. And then I won't make any money. So ultimately, it is the money, right? So some of you may have already been exposed to this. But if you have had to fill out your questionnaires for the banks when homeowners are selling their units and they've got an offer and somebody's trying to obtain financing to buy the unit, you guys, the community managers, the board members, whoever handling it, you guys fill out the questionnaire. And questionnaires used to be pretty simple, but they keep adding more and more questions. Well, there's a new slew of questions that have to do with, is the association, is the board aware of any, like structural issues, any not repairs that were not made that could impact the structure, any situation that could impact the structure. A lot of questions about being aware of structural deficiencies or structural issues that aren't getting fixed. And that's really scary, because most associations and community managers, we're not engineers, right? How do we answer that question? I've had associations try some creative things that miserably failed. I know a few have tried basically responding with an attached reserve study as saying, here's our reserve study, this is an engineering question, but here's the reserve study, take a look at it and you can hopefully, figure all this out. Well, Fannie Mae especially has pretty much said, heck no, that doesn't fly. We're not going to be reviewing your reserve study. Not good enough. Okay. I've had associations respond and say, well, what you're asking is not something that the board is capable of answering, because you would have to be, again, an engineer, you'd have to understand structure, you'd have to be an architect, but the board does not have this expertise and therefore cannot answer. Again, big thumbs down, it's not gonna work. The one thing that may work, and I think has worked, is a response along the lines of, to the best of our knowledge, we, the board, are not aware, or we, the association, we, the management company, are not aware of any situation that might impact the structural integrity, of the buildings. When you say to the best of our knowledge, that's a little bit of a protection, because you're saying, as far as I know, I can't, I'm not guaranteeing this answer for you, but as far as I know, there's nothing wrong. Now, could a person still get backlash if all of a sudden there are structural problems later on and buildings collapse? I suppose they could say, well, you should have known. That's knowledge. If you really looked into this, you would have known. But that's pretty far-fetched, I think. I mean, think about all the years that you've been in this industry or just been around. How often do you hear about buildings collapsing? Okay. How often do we hear about big high-rise condominium buildings just falling and collapsing? It's not like it happens every day. It most certainly does not, or Surfside wouldn't have been such a big deal. And so some people are saying, you know what? People are overreacting. This happened once, doesn't mean it's going to happen again. And, people just need to relax. But that doesn't help us when it comes to these Fannie Mae required disclosures at all. There are some email exchanges, listservs with attorneys, HOA attorneys around the country that has also been bantering about, these new disclosures and what, can be done about it. And one thing that, was suggested is all the associations should just refuse to answer that question. And when everyone refuses, well, then Fannie Mae will know it's not working and it better change its questions. Well, that's a nice hypothetical, but in the meantime, you're not going to have any units sell? And now you're going to have all these homeowners upset with the board because we're not answering, this questionnaire, and they can't sell their units because of us? I'm not so sure I agree with that concept. But regardless, you need to be aware that this is out there. And so what it means is associations are forced to take these maintenance and repair responsibilities far more seriously, because now everybody's looking at the various structural components. What does that mean? Intrusive testing? Possibly. Reserve studies for sure, but is a reserve study enough? Is a reserve study gonna, go and do intrusive testing to make sure that the structure itself is stable? I don't know enough about that to advise you. That's not a legal issue, but certainly it's being scrutinized a lot more in associations, especially, the ones that have multiple levels, multiple units in a building. Our associations do have to take it more seriously now, because there is going to be ramifications at some point. All right. Another not happy one. But let's move on. Let's see what else we got. Virtual meetings may still be the best way to go. So I would love for you guys to be able to show your hands, but I personally think that's true. I much prefer to attend a virtual meeting than an in-person meeting for several reasons. But regardless of what I think, one thing we've learned over this past year, 2 years, is that on average, there is better attendance at virtual meetings. It's a heck of a lot easier to click on your computer from your couch than to put on your coat and boots and walk through the snow to the clubhouse or wherever to go attend this meeting, or drive somewhere to attend the meeting, right? We have been seeing much better attendance by homeowners to both board meetings as well as annual meetings, homeowner meetings. And there really is no other factor to attribute it to but the fact that it's easier for them to get there. So I was at a virtual annual meeting a couple months ago. It was a really ugly one. And this was one where the homeowners were real unhappy with the board for various reasons. And one of the reasons they were upset is because the board decided to hold the meeting virtually. And they yelled and screamed at the board about, you're violating my rights, and you're doing this so people can't express themselves. And they just had all sorts of complaints about it. But in reality, the number of people that were at this meeting, they never would have gotten that many into their clubhouse. They wouldn't have had that many people show up. And every single person who was on that Zoom meeting all got a chance to speak more than once. and some more than like 5 times, and it was kind of whatever. So every single person there got an opportunity to speak. I don't know if they would have if it was a physical meeting. It's a lot easier for a physical meeting to run amok than it is for a virtual meeting. The other thing with virtual meetings is they're easier to keep under control if the meeting host is willing to mute people. I know there are some folks who are very gun shy. They don't want to mute anyone because then they're going to get yelled at, but they can't yell at you if they're muted. I mean, they can, but you won't hear it, right? And I think the communities that do use this ability to mute, I'm not saying you don't let people talk, but what I'm saying is if you have 2 minutes per homeowner to speak, and they're going 2.5 minutes and they're nowhere near done, and you've asked them to stop talking and they don't care and they keep talking, now's the time to mute them. Okay, we're not telling them they can't speak, but we have allotted a specific time, and it's not fair to the other folks in attendance. So if you're willing to mute, it's a lot easier to keep control over a virtual meeting as opposed to an in-person meeting. Are they safer? Well, I mean, certainly if you're concerned about COVID exposure, yes, they're safer. You don't have to leave your house. I've also been to plenty of meetings where the board has an off-duty police officer or even an on-duty police officer present because they're nervous. There are some homeowners in the community that are angry. We don't know what they're capable of. We got to have the police there. I mean, that's scary, right? You don't have to worry about that if you're doing a virtual meeting. So there's definitely a lot of benefits to doing virtual meetings, and people are getting more comfortable with doing virtual meetings. And now I'm even seeing folks do more virtual voting. I'm seeing more and more associations purchasing programs that allow secret ballot voting during the virtual meeting. So I'm seeing that. And I think those programs, it sounds to me, are becoming less expensive. I think there's still a few $1,000s, but maybe not, because I'm seeing more and more communities getting these. And so I know one of the things that people didn't like was having to vote by a mail ballot, which is also a very good option. But there are ways now to more or less affordably obtain software that allows you to do the secret ballot voting during the virtual meeting. And that's really cool. All right, next. Vaccines are not the end all be all. So to me, the term vaccine for what we have doesn't seem right. I mean, if I get a polio vaccine as a kid, I'm not going to get polio. If I get a COVID vaccine, I can still get COVID. Okay, so is it really a vaccine? I don't know. But whatever it is, you can catch it, you can transmit it, right? We know that now. I think originally people thought that if you got the vaccine, you weren't going to get it, you were safe to be around and all that stuff. And then we learned, wait a minute, I may have the vaccine, but I can still get COVID. And if I have COVID, I can still give it to somebody. Now, what's the benefit of having the vaccine? Well, the goal is you're not going to die. You're not going to go to the hospital. It's going to be much, much milder symptoms. And I think we are seeing that to be true. Of course, now, everybody has to get a booster, and who knows if there's going to be yet another booster after that. So, but it's not the end all be all, right? And so I think originally people had, I don't want to say higher hopes, but maybe higher hopes for the vaccine. And it didn't turn out to be exactly all that in a bag of chips. Although I personally still believe in it, and I think it is definitely a protection. So it's kind of like the flu. You could get the flu, you could be sick from the flu, even if you have a flu shot. Notice they don't call it the flu vaccine though. Even if you get a flu shot, you can still get the flu. But the goal is it's, going to be milder. So a lot of people do get that. Okay, moving on. There's no consistency. And I don't know if anyone else is annoyed by this, but I am, because we got different mandates from different counties, right? As far as even masks. Okay, so I personally live in Douglas County. When I'm in Douglas County, I don't have to wear my mask because Douglas County does not have the mask mandate. You can wear it if you want. You certainly don't have to. I can go into a restaurant. I can go into stores. I don't have to wear a mask unless the business specifically, wants me to, but most of them don't. I know as soon as I cross County Line Road and go to the north side of it, I'm putting on my mask because that's Arapahoe or it's Jeffco, and they all have the mask mandate. So I can be driving down County Line Road. If I go to the restaurant on the south side, no mask. If I go to a restaurant on the north side, mask time. It's really annoying. I know it's the struggle is real. That's all I have to say. People can't agree whether masks are good or whether masks are bad. We've got all sorts of studies. Some of them are saying, oh yeah, masks, you need masks. They're going to protect you. Other studies are saying masks make no difference whatsoever. So if they don't make a difference, why do we need them? We got people with different opinions, as you can see on these pictures at the bottom, with respect to masks in schools. We got folks saying, hey, you can't force our kids to wear masks. And then there's others that are saying you have to wear masks because that keeps our kids safe and our schools open. So who really knows whether that's something that is true or not, or how that works? Can the virus be transmitted on surfaces? First, everyone was like, oh, sanitize your hands when you touch something. And then they said, no, you can't be transmitted through surfaces. And so again, nothing substantial. Everything keeps changing. So the only consistency is that there is no consistency, right? And I suspect that's going to keep going on because people are afraid. People are afraid of getting sick. They're afraid of their family members getting sick. And there's been so much fear the last 2 years that I think a lot of people would rather err on the side of caution and protect themselves and their families rather than not. But again, it's a personal choice. But as far as everything else goes, it's just not consistent. All right, another one that I really want to talk about in some detail. Difficult times bring on more litigation. I think that's a no-brainer. We already talked about how people are angrier, people are not nice, people are more nitpicky, they're less patient, right? Are you guys all seeing this? Not just, in our HOAs, but just in general, people, driving. I hear more, people beeping at other people. I hear more people yelling at other people. It's everywhere. It's not just within HOAs. Although we definitely get the brunt of it just based on how and what we do. So with that, I'm seeing more owners retaining attorneys, and I'm seeing more owners actually filing legal action against associations. Now, a lot of these legal actions are completely baseless, and I can't believe that an attorney would take it on, but then I'm like, oh, wait, yeah, it's an attorney who wants money, so why not, right? But I can't believe that some of these meritless lawsuits are out there. There are some that are kind of meritless, but technically have a point. There are some that do have merit. So what we're also seeing right now is that courts are actually scrutinizing these actions a lot more. Okay, they're not just saying, oh, whatever, you pretty much followed the rules, association, we're going to let you move forward with this. They're saying, no, if you haven't dotted your I's and you haven't crossed your T's and complied with every single component of what your documents require and what the law requires, association, we're not going to let you do it. Okay. And so what ends up happening is associations that, especially in the past, have done things their way and it's never been challenged before. It's now getting challenged, and it turns out their way is not correct. All right. And I'm seeing more and more of it, whether it's meeting notices, whether it's voting, whether it's elections, whether it's something else, it's getting scrutinized. Whether it's sending demand letters to someone who's in violation, the judges are looking at specifics, even if ultimately it doesn't impact anything. If you haven't complied, the judges are going to see it and they are going to rule against you. So that is kind of one of the big things from a legal perspective that I think all boards and community managers need to be aware of. And I'm not saying this to tell you you need to, pay attorneys more, but I do recommend consulting with experts for any type of decisions, especially when it comes to the legal process. Don't wing it. Get the facts, get the knowledge, and follow it to a T. Because otherwise, it could come back to haunt you, and it could really impact the association. Okay? So just be careful. Be more scrutinizing over everything that the association does. Another interesting one. The government will continue to legislate against HOA's freedoms. So let's talk a little bit about that. This is an interesting one because, as you guys know, and we've seen changes last year too, we've had in Colorado, let's just say Colorado, the legislature has said, hey, you can't prohibit signs, you can't prohibit flags, you can't content regulate, blah, blah, blah. And why do they do this? They do this in the name of protecting the homeowner's rights. What rights? Constitutional rights? I don't know. But homeowners, ironically, do not have constitutional rights when it comes to private entities and private contracts. When a homeowner buys a unit in the HOA, the declaration is treated as a contract that the homeowner agrees to. If they don't like the terms, their option is not to buy in that community, but it is a contract between the association and the owner. Even though the owner doesn't legally sign it, under the law, that's what it is. So there are no constitutional protections when it comes to private entities contracting between themselves and agreeing to certain things. Like if you want to live in this community, we will not allow you to have flags. We will not allow you to have certain signs, whatever. That is not a violation of anyone's constitutional law. However, we've got legislators saying, oh no, you can't do this, HOAs, because it violates the homeowner's rights. So now let's flip it on its head. What is an association? It's a corporation. It's a nonprofit corporation. And nonprofit corporations actually have constitutional rights, protecting them from the government, which is what the Constitution protects people from, is the government, not private entities. So the Constitution protects people, entities, in the right to contract. Private contracts cannot be impacted by the government. That's a violation of constitutional law. Yet here we have the government, Colorado government, adopting statutes that do prohibit private corporations, associations, from having certain verbiage in their declaration with respect to whatever the terms of ownership are. So in the name of protecting a constitutional freedom of homeowners, which doesn't exist, the legislature has and continues to violate the constitutional protection to contract afforded to people and entities. It's kind of mind-boggling when you think about it. So and we are going to continue to see this, right? So we saw some legislation last year. It was nothing compared to what was proposed. And the fact that, of course, we had COVID issues still, there, and a lot of the proposed legislation basically just got eliminated. And there were some pretty egregious things that were proposed. And so we don't know. This year, legislative season is going to start, we anticipate some of those things trying to come back. And is our legislature, our legislature, is it going to allow these things to get pushed through into law and violate the nonprofit corporation's ability to contract? I don't know. All right, so signs, flags, manner of holding meetings, rights of boards to govern private communities, right? So again, this is kind of to me, it's a little scary that this is happening. All right. Let's talk about some things that worked and haven't worked in 21. How about that? Maybe that'll help us. All right, conservative budgeting has worked. Why? Well, as we talked earlier, prices are going up, especially insurance, but everything else is going up, right? Water's going up, electricity's going up, building materials. Oh my God, wood is so expensive right now. Everything's going up. So, you know, for an association to really think about its budget and budget conservatively, as far as its expenditures and planning on spending, you know, doing less perhaps, or bringing in more income with the expectation that everything's going to cost exponentially more. Conservative budgeting has worked for quite a few associations. Reserve studies. These have worked, especially with communities that, you know, are subject to all these, you know, structural disclosures now with Fannie Mae, right? So reserve studies, now even though Fannie Mae won't accept a reserve study, it helps the community because it helps us understand what's going on and what we need to budget for as far as replacement and what that's going to look like. Allocating money to reserves, I mean, this all kind of falls under conservative budgeting, right? We know there's going to be a huge deductible for wind hail. We know we're going to need to replace something. Let's budget for it. Virtual meetings, talked about that and how generally they do work. Mail ballot elections, they work too. Now, one thing I probably should have put in here and didn't was the virtual meeting elections, because that works great for those associations that have a system in place for doing it. But mail ballot elections, they work. It's a lot of extra work in the sense of mailing things out and then, you know, the secret balloting and keeping the, you know, keeping the ballots, keeping the envelopes, keeping everything separate, and then counting everything. You know, that's kind of a pain in the butt. But I'm not saying it's not, you know, it's easy. I'm just saying it works. Okay. Strict interpretation of governing documents in the law absolutely has worked, because we know that courts are scrutinizing a whole heck of a lot more now than they have in the past. And there's more litigation, more homeowners nitpicking things that their associations do. And to follow your documents strictly as they are written is really the best practice. It's always been the best practice, but now it's really the best practice. Being proactive as to maintenance. So that also, it all goes back to Surfside, right? People are now scrutinizing boards more as far as, are you pushing the can down the road with repairs? Are you making the repairs right when we need them? Are you making the appropriate repairs? Are you being cheap and just doing a Band-Aid? All of this now has fallen under scrutiny because of Surfside. Right or wrong, Surfside has now created this panic with respect to these types of condominium buildings. And that's something that HOAs are going to have to live with until something changes. All right. So those are all the things that have worked in 21. You guys want to talk about things that haven't worked? All right, let's do that. By the way, I love this picture. It made me laugh so hard when I saw it. I love the woman sitting there. I love my HOA. All right, so it didn't work. All right. Deferred maintenance, right? We talked about that just now. If you're putting a Band-Aid on it, that's going to be scrutinized far more by homeowners, by judges, because We still have Surfside, and it's new and it's still there. You know, it hasn't been resolved. It just happened last year. It's going to continue to be an issue. Deferred maintenance does not work very well for HOAs. Deferred assessment increases, same thing. So I was at a budget ratification meeting, also virtual, where this particular association, it was about, I can't remember if it was like between 40 and 50% increase in the assessments. Now, somehow it still got ratified. That were there were so upset. And they were upset because they had, I mean, you know why they were upset, right? I mean, a 50% increase, what the heck is going on? That's ridiculous. And why did this association have to do this humongous increase? Because prior boards didn't want the homeowners to be upset with them because they increased assessments. They were all like, we're going to keep assessments down. We're going to keep assessments down. That's what we're going to do. That's the best thing for us. And then in the end, everyone got screwed because there wasn't enough money to perform the work. And when it really caught up with them and they couldn't push it down the road anymore, this board that wasn't the one that pushed the can down the road, but the board that was in place then and there had to significantly increase assessments, and everybody hated them. But it wasn't even their fault. I have an election coming up for one of my communities, and there is a board candidate who's running, and his platform is, I'm going to lower assessments. I'm going to keep your assessments low. And although for homeowners that kind of don't understand the background of it, that sounds really good, but I'm looking at it and I'm cringing and I'm thinking, oh my God, that is the absolute wrong thing to base your platform on, because you can't lower assessments. You can't keep them low. You're going to have to keep increasing them. Everything is increasing. All costs are increasing. And you're not going to be able to follow through with this promise. And if you are, it's going to be at the detriment of the community because you're not going to be able to do certain maintenance, certain repairs, and then you're going to have the deferred maintenance issues. So it's a vicious circle. Assessment increases are necessary, unfortunately, and you know, it is not, I wouldn't consider the board really acting in best interest of the association if its sole purpose is to keep the assessments low, because chances are it's not looking at other things that need to happen in the association, and it's not funding them. Okay, underfunded reserve accounts, that's the same thing as kind of the deferred assessment increases, because ultimately you're going to need those reserve funds, right, for all these repairs that hopefully have not been pushed down the road, but might have been. So an underfunded reserve account, again, is going to require the association to go to the homeowners and either special assess, or they're going to have to borrow money. They're going to have to do something to get that money because they don't have it in reserves. So an underfunded reserve account does not work. And we've probably seen this time and time again. Playing it by ear. So kind of like, yeah, we'll see how it goes. So had a leak in the roof. It was one time. We're gonna wait and see if there's gonna be another leak before we spend money on it. No, not a good idea. You have to be proactive. Don't play it by ear. Don't just kind of wing it. Boards need to have a plan. They need to have a fiscally responsible plan, and they need to know that when things come up that are repair, maintenance related, it's not a good idea, especially now, to push that can down the road. It's just not. Failure to strictly comply with governing documents and state laws. We already talked about why this is necessary. Emotional outbursts. All right, I admit it, we're all human. We all have emotional outbursts. Sometimes we just can't control ourselves. But I have never, in all my years of doing this, that I've been at a meeting where somebody had an emotional outburst and all of a sudden it fixed the situation. I have never seen that. Have you? If you have, please, write something in, because I have never seen that. Usually when we have emotional outbursts, it breeds more emotional outbursts and things go downhill even more really fast. So to the extent we can control ourselves and not do emotional outbursts, I think that would be ideal, not just for the boards, not just for community managers, but for homeowners, for everybody. Okay. Not picking your battles. With owners being so nitpicky right now and so irritated, they tend to purposely like poke you. For example, I had a homeowner request to the board, a homeowner list, and he basically was, I think he was trying to be jerky about it because he was mad at the board. And he said, I want you to produce this to me and I want you to email it to me. And the board's like, well, we're not going to email it to him. We're going to make him come down and inspect it at the management company office. And I said, is that really the hill you want to die on? That? When you can just hit a button and email it to him, you want to start having this back and forth with this guy about he's entitled to email or no, he's not entitled to email, eventually adding to legal fees with me getting involved? Is that something you really want to do right now when you got all these other issues going on? It really wasn't. And they did end up just emailing it to him. And it was great. Disaster averted. It was easy. It didn't cost them anything. It didn't, there was no harm in doing it. So pick your battles. All right. Last year, I did predictions for 21. So let's take a look at our predictions and see if they came true. We said 2021 will be a better year. Well, I say it depends on who you ask. Personally, I believe it was a better year, but I know there's some people who don't think it was at all. It'll get worse before it gets better. Did it? Has it? Again, I personally don't think it got worse. I think it got better slowly, but that may not be your experience. Associations will continue to conduct much of their business virtually. I think that one is true. There's still a lot of stuff that gets done virtually by associations. Again, we talked about the virtual side. I think it's good. Lawsuits based on COVID transmission. Haven't seen those yet, at least not at like the appellate or Supreme Court level. So, we were worried about, pools and associations getting sued because someone got COVID at the pool. Haven't really seen that, and I'm glad that prediction was wrong. Continued pool and exercise room closures, not as much, right? A lot of you guys opened your pools this past summer and your workout rooms and all that stuff. Vaccine will help bring things back to normal, whatever that means. Again, I think it depends who you talk to. I don't think we're back to the normal we were at before COVID, right? But I think we've normalized more, but I think it just depends on how you define that term. So my next question is, do we have predictions for 22? And of course we do. Let's take a look at these. More of the same. Again, these are not all my predictions. This is for people I talked to and emailed with. More of the same. Okay. More mask mandates in flux. I can buy into that. Continued increases in insurance costs. We talked about that. I definitely buy into that one. Continued cost increases for just about everything. Yeah, I think so. Assessment increases. A lot of associations are playing catch up right now, and I'm seeing more and more associations being forced to up their assessments. So I'm going to bet in favor of that happening in 22. More increased collections, so more collection accounts getting turned over to collection agencies or attorneys to collect on. More meritless lawsuits against associations. Unfortunately, I just don't have enough faith in humans to think that that is wrong. I think we are going to see more meritless lawsuits against associations and more legit lawsuits against associations. There's a lot of associations out there right now that are not strictly following their documents. They're not strictly following the law, and they don't listen necessarily when their attorneys tell them you got to do X, Y, and Z. They're like, nobody's going to question it. We're just going to do it our way. And so far, they've been lucky. But there's going to come a time as homeowners get more and more upset, which they still are, where they're going to start questioning everything. And I think, again, now is the time when that happens. So now is the time when you got to be more in tune as to what you are doing as an association, and that you're following and strictly complying with the law and your documents. Okay, so these are the predictions for 22. In early 23, when we do this class again, will be this class, it'll be a different class, but it'll be looking back on 22. We're going to see if we were right with any of these predictions. Now, I know I always had great luck with this picture. Community managers love this picture, and I think it's hilarious myself. So every so often, I got to stick it in a class. But I am actually done with my portion of it. I'm going to start going through the questions now. And okay, everybody's seen the puppy and the shaming sign? Okay, good. All right. And then, of course, there's this picture, and I love this one as well. All right, so let's go through questions. I only see 4 right now. Is it a requirement to have a statement of interest for every person on the ballot? By statement of interest, I assume you mean like, here's why I'm running for the board. It's not a requirement. It's not. But the Nonprofit Act says that when you're doing a mail ballot, you have to provide your homeowners with enough information for them to make an educated decision. And I don't know whether the statement of interest would constitute that kind of information. I legally don't think you have to include it. However, I think it's best practice to include it if you can get it from the candidates. Is item 7 being challenged in court? If you recall, item 7, and you will get copies of the PowerPoint after conclusion of the class along with your little credit certificate, so you will have this. Item 7 was the legislature and kind of violating the association's constitutional rights. There have been various lawsuits kind of around the nation, just on kind of state level, that, and there's been different reactions from different courts, as you might expect. There's nothing consistent out there, but I will tell you that, so in February, the CAI law seminar is coming, and that's, usually mostly attorneys around the country. And then we teach classes. And so we're actually teaching a class this year about how this has become a prevalent pattern with legislatures all around the country. There's a lot of states that have various types of legislation that prohibits associations from regulating certain things that they really do have a right to regulate. So this is going on. This is happening a lot. I think we're going to start seeing more challenges to it. But right now, we don't have any like Supreme Court decision or even an appellate court decision on it. Are homeowners allowed to fly any kind of flag they wish? Yes, they are. The only flags and signs that may be regulated or prohibited are commercial messaging. So for example, if you're flying a flag saying, buy this air conditioner from this company, that the board can say, no, you cannot have that. But other than that, any other kind of flag, yeah, associations cannot control content of flags or signs. Okay. Can the association still prohibit signs on balconies? It's only inside of the units that we cannot prohibit, correct? So for condominiums, right, this is not for townhomes or patio homes. In condominium units, associations can prohibit signs from being on any of the common elements. So yeah, we have to allow them in windows, we have to allow them inside the unit. But as far as balconies, we do not have to allow signs on balconies. But here's the kicker, we do have to allow flags on balconies. Okay, so we can't prohibit flags from being displayed on balconies. So that's what the law is right now. How would you respond to a board that says they don't have a reserve study because they have financially minded board members? I would probably ask them if their financially minded board members have enough money stored away that if they happen to get sued for a breach of their fiduciary duty to properly manage the association's funds and properly manage the association, if they're going to have money to defend themselves, because they may not be protected under insurance when you are willfully doing something that you know can hurt the association. So again, I work with a lot of communities, and I would say 99% of them have reserves. And I just would not. So actually, did I misread this? Because it says reserve study. Did you mean reserve study, or did you mean reserve a reserve account? So a reserve study is nothing to do really with finance. I mean, it does, but it's more about here are the things you're going to need to plan on replacing. And that has nothing to do with whether you're financial minded. It has to do with you're not an engineer and you're not going to know. So a reserve study is a different issue. You did mean reserve study. Okay. So reserve studies, you know, there is in Kiowa, there is a requirement that associations have a policy that talks about a reserve study, how often they're going to have one done, what it's going to include. And so it doesn't flat out say you have to have a reserve study, but it strongly implies it. So I think not having a reserve study for whatever reason, unless you don't maintain anything in the community, I think that's subject to liability for failing to comply with Kiowa. So that's what I would probably tell your board members. And also the thing about getting sued, I mean, that could work, that could take effect as well. What if residents use signs or flags as window coverings? So, you know, that's kind of a fine line. Is it a flag? Is it a sign? Or is it a window covering? So one of the things you can regulate as an HOA is the size of flags and the size of signs. So if you have a policy which says a sign can only be 3 by 5 feet, then if they have a bigger sign in the window, then that's something you would be able to enforce. Same thing with flags. What constitutes deferred maintenance? Does this mean if it is listed in our reserve study with a useful life and it has passed that time? That's certainly one example of it. But another example is where, like I said, you've got a problem with the roof and you get options. We can use a Band-Aid, like we can seal it, but you know, it's going to come back. What you really need is a replacement. But the board says, you know what? No, we're not going to replace it now. It's too expensive. We don't want to do it. We're just going to do let's seal it and see how long it goes. That's deferred. That's basically putting a patch on, knowing that you're not fixing the problem. You're just kind of pushing it down the road. Can HOAs ask residents to remove their BLM signs? Nope, you sure can't. Not based on content anyway. If you have a limit in the number of signs, or you have a limit on size, and you have a homeowner who's got 2 signs where you only allow 1, or it's larger than what's allowed, you can tell them, hey, you got to remove one of the signs. You can't tell them which one. Or, hey, you got to remove this sign because it's too big and put in, the appropriate size. You can do that. All right, I think we got everyone. And that's perfect timing. Awesome, guys. If you think of anything else, my email's on here. Feel free to reach out. Are BLM signs considered political signs? They're not. And you know what else? It doesn't matter if they are, because political signs are not protected any longer. Doesn't matter if they're political signs or US flags or whatever. That's content. Can't regulate it. All right, it's a big change. Glad you guys enjoyed it. I'll see you next week if you're coming to the next webinar. Okay, have a great one, everyone. Thanks for coming. Appreciate it.